Strainprint, the president and CTO. Let's hear it for Dave Berg.
Well, thanks for the nice intro. We are going to break tradition from the other formatted discussions or panels that you've seen here. We've got a very diverse panel. We're studying advancements in medical science from the perspective of cannabinoid medicine. And we have a very diverse group here. So I'd like to give everyone the ability to introduce themselves with the support of some slides and to give them the ability to fill in the blanks. So interestingly, I'm the only one up here that does not have an MD or a PhD, but I come to you with some interesting experience. So a couple of years ago, my partners and I were onboarding into the Canadian medical program and trying to find a way to get more information about the appropriate products we should be using, how we should be dosing, and what we can expect from the outcome of our treatments. And we found that we looked at literary reviews, we spoke to our doctors, we spoke to clinics and other caregivers, and there was no data available. So we set forth to build that data set, and we've done that in Canada and North America, and we're actually here having great discussions with a number of people in the German and Swiss market about ways we can apply our approach. And what we predominantly do is we've developed a mobile app that allows patients in Canada to track their interaction with lab-verified products. So we do this across 350 different medical conditions, and we analyze their response to Canadian registered products. So this has given us a preview of a lot of consumer and patient behavior and observational use over a 2-year period of time. So it's quite enlightening, and especially for the medical audience. So all of our data is crowdsourced. It's gathered from patients. We also have a community where we support patients for discussions that are hard to have on Facebook, and that rolls up into an analytics platform. And the data that we collect from this platform is used by retail pharmacies across Canada to provide prescribing guidance when a patient calls in. So it's based on the large cohort data that we produce in the app. We've been fairly successful in our mission so far. We've gathered over 1.2 million patient interactions. This is on a platform that's HIPAA, PIPEDA, and FIPA compliant. And we're probably the largest medicinal observational data set in the world. And what we do is we provide this tool to physicians, to researchers and clinicians, to help them to identify what is working and what is not. So that's kind of a background of how I arrive at this table. I have a different view of medical patients. It's based on statistical and correlatory analysis. And what I'd like to do is give everyone else the ability to introduce themselves in a similar fashion. So in order of the slides, I'd first like to introduce Dr. Franjo Grotenhermen, who is very well known amongst this crowd. He is the executive director of the International Association for Cannabinoid Medicines, ICBC, in Germany. He is also the chairman of the Association for Cannabis as a Medicine in Germany. And he is also a medical practitioner. So let me hand it over to Franjo to introduce himself.
Does it? Very good. So I have only 2 slides. I don't know if you know the legal situation in Germany exactly. And I thought I would like to introduce it first. This is a slide on the prerequisites for reimbursement for cannabis medicines by German health insurers. And this is also kind of a guideline for German physicians in which conditions they prescribe cannabis. And there are 3 prerequisites. First, the patients have to suffer from a severe disease. Sometimes there's a discussion between the physician and the health insurer if this is severe. For example, the health insurer may argue, well, he's able to work, so the disease is not so severe. The second prerequisite is that a generally recognized medical standard treatment is either not available or cannot be applied on the reasonable assessment of the treating physician. And the third, which is very interesting or important when it comes to research or the available data, is that there is a founded chance, or a kind of justified chance, of a noticeable positive effect on the course of the disease or on serious symptoms. And the latter requirement is fulfilled that there is scientific research supporting this chance. It is not necessary that there are large clinical studies with 200 or 300 patients. It may be sufficient that there is, for example, for Tourette syndrome, we have only very small studies, 10, 20 people, but Tourette syndrome is accepted. So it would be interesting to have research with 20 or 30 people, 20 or 30 patients, in diseases where we have nearly nothing today. I give you some examples. Please, next slide. Sorry. I give you some diseases which are promising but currently unresearched. And the number of people suffering in Germany with this disease. For example, we have about 2 million people with ADHD above the age of 18. The current guidelines for treatment of ADHD in Germany say don't use cannabis. They explicitly say that you should not use it. We need some more data to show it is effective, at least in some people. Autism, we have no real good medication to treat autism. No good standard medication to treat autism. But cannabis often is helping, and we have about 500,000 people in Germany suffering from autism, and there is absolutely no clinical research. For ADHD, we have at least one clinical study conducted with the cannabis Sativex in the UK, but with autism we have nothing. Depression. We have good antidepressant medications, but 1/3 or 30% of patients do not profit from standard medication. So if we have 3.5 million patients with depression, there would be about 1 million depressed patients who do not get sufficient relief by standard medication. And there's no research. There's some research on reactive depression in cancer, for example, but with neurotic depression or major depression, we have nothing. Post-traumatic stress disorder, we have some research on it, but we should have more. Obsessive compulsive disorder, we have nothing. We have a few case reports, for example, from the Charité in Berlin here. 1.4 million people suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder. These are not always severe cases, but as in any case, any disease, you have light, moderate, and severe conditions. Psychiatric conditions are usually under-researched when it comes to cannabis. This has tradition, because psychiatrists often are very reluctant when it comes to the medical use. So we have to do research in this area of psychotic conditions, because the patients are suffering. Many of them do not get enough relief from standard medication. And for the companies, this is also a market, if you say it in other words. For the patients, it's a need. For the company, it's a market And for researchers, it is a must-do. We have many physical conditions where we do not have much or no research. For example, I see patients with acne inversa. It's not well known. It's an unresearched and unknown disease, suffering more than 500,000 people in Germany alone. And we have no good medication. They are usually undergoing surgery once a year or something. Cluster headache. We have something with migraine, but we have nothing with cluster headache. Hyperhidrosis. I have several people with hyperhidrosis, severe hyperhidrosis. There are 3 grades, from light, moderate to severe. And I have patients who have undergone surgery to treat their hyperhidrosis of the arms and the hands. And cannabis, at least in some people, works well. We do not have clinical research, so we don't know the percentage of people who may profit from a treatment with cannabis. What I can say, at least some people profit. Very good. Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, tinnitus. When it comes to research, I give an example with another unresearched condition, which is restless leg syndrome. With restless leg syndrome, you also see that it is not only about THC. And this is maybe true for other indications. So it may be reasonable, for example, to have a 3-arm research. 1 arm placebo, 1 arm an indica strain, 1 arm sativa strain, or 1 arm CBD THC strain, and 1 THC strain. The example is the following. 4 weeks ago, I had a patient with restless leg syndrome, treatment resistant to standard medication. She went to the Netherlands to try cannabis. It worked very well. She came back. Some months later, she had an appointment in my practice. And I told her, well, in restless leg syndrome, I usually prescribe indica varieties, but they were not available. You know, the problems with getting enough cannabis to Germany. And I prescribed a sativa strain to her. And 3 days later, she was very disappointed. She said, it does not work right. And meanwhile, indica strains were available. I prescribed an indica strain, and some days later, she said, I have the same effect as with the cannabis in the Netherlands. I could sleep like a baby. So, thank you.
Thanks for having me. My name is Dr. Tim Hsu. My background is a veterinarian. I'm from California. Prior to starting my company VetCBD, I practiced in general, emergency, critical care medicine. And the reason why I founded VetCBD in 2015 was because as a healthcare practitioner, I believe we have a moral and ethical obligation to pursue all potential courses of therapy for our patients. And my approach is that if cannabis has potential therapeutic benefits, then we owe it to our patients and the pet owners to be able to pursue those therapeutics. And even if cannabis doesn't have any sort of therapeutic benefits, we need to find that out. We need to make that information available to pet owners so they can make the best decisions for their pets. The reality is that for animals, the lifespan's a lot shorter. A lot of patients don't have time to wait. It's now or never. So from the time that we're bringing them home when they're puppies, in the blink of an eye, lifetimes pass by. Before we know it, we're saying our goodbyes. And so in 2015, I retired from practice and started VetCBD so that way we could provide cannabinoid therapeutics for animals. And the things that we've used it for the past 4 years, for thousands and thousands of patients across California, are primarily things like pain, anxiety, inflammation, nausea, seizures, and cancer. And a lot of people may be familiar with using cannabis or CBD for dogs, but we also use it for cats. We use it for horses, guinea pigs, rabbits, rats, pigs, ferrets. So you name it. The reality is that all vertebrate animals have endocannabinoid systems, and they do stand to benefit from cannabis therapeutics. A lot of people talk about THC, and they don't know about its use for THC in animals, but we do use THC in animals. It's not just CBD. We do use full spectrum products that include THC. We also look at CBC, CBG. really when we approach cannabinoid therapeutics, the reality is that the endocannabinoid system was only discovered in the 90s. And so as a field of medicine, we're really just scratching the surface. And ultimately, my goal is to be able to integrate cannabinoid therapeutics with veterinary medicine so that way we can benefit our patients, we can provide them quality of life, and we can provide sustained value to those pet owners.
Hello, everybody. I'm a senior scientist from Volcani Center, Israel. I'm a head of a lab in Volcani, which is a governmental research institute. And in my lab, we are focused on cannabis studies. We are involved with the process that Israel is going now of this reform of medicalization, where with other national bodies like the Israeli Gene Bank, we form genetics, collection of seeds of genetics that is the national collection of Israel and will serve growers and scientists for the further developments of this field. We characterize this collection, and however, the main activity in my lab is, I think, what might be the major challenge that we face in this field of cannabis for medical use, and this is the generation of evidence-based medicine. And this is what we are focused on. In my lab, we ask what are the best mixtures of active cannabis compounds for optimized treatment for different medical indications or conditions. To answer this particular question, we have a very small farm for research purposes only. We develop different extraction protocols or use different extraction protocols. We do deep chemical analysis. We see far and beyond THC versus CBD, whatever. We look at many different cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, whatever there is. We do separation of the compounds and then examine in different bioassays that reflect, at least to some extent, different medical conditions. We are able to identify the compounds and the compositions and the entourage effect that we heard about these days. We are able to identify these compounds that act together for optimized treatment of patients. We work with physicians from hospitals in Israel, and the information that we find in our studies is being now developed by commercial companies to products that are going into clinical trials in hospitals in Israel. So just briefly, let me take you as to the future, at least as the way that we see it in cannabis for medical use. So we all start from weeds and sativa and indica that we heard about quite a lot, and from different strains or cultivars that we heard about. By conducting bioassays, we identify synergies between cannabis molecules. These synergies, of course, also by chemical analysis, leads to formulation of active pharmaceutical ingredients, or active plant ingredients, all derived from cannabis. But we are able to determine what the formulation of active compounds is. We look for targets and mode of action of these specific synergistic API. And then by a process of development being done by our commercial collaborators that include different steps of regulation and development of drug delivery, which is also highly important. By that, we are able to promote and to bring, we believe, new generation of cannabis-based products for medical use. Those that will be based on API, on synergies, and will be standardized for optimal and specific use for patients. Thank you.
I'm trying to stay away. So we've had a lot of discussion about the ways that cannabis can be used to treat things like IBS, Crohn's disease, depression. We've heard about its use in animal and veterinary care, and we've talked about isolating cannabinoids and terpenes into formulations that more closely approximate a molecular drug. So one of the things that I think is necessary as the industry moves forward and as cannabis develops into a medicine is to understand those interactions and the entourage effect, because it's the seclusion or preclusion of certain elements within a strain that actually will dictate the way that it interacts with the human body. And as Franjo had mentioned, there's very, very big differences between the people who will respond from strain to strain. In terms of the Israeli approach, we're looking at isolating and reconstituting product for test within market. And in order for doctors to be comfortable with it, this is at least something that we see in the Canadian medical program, is that you need to be able to talk the language or the rubric or lexicon that the doctor is used to prescribing against. And because this is an evidence-based study, a lot of physicians these days, at least from what we see at Strainprint, are reticent to prescribe because they don't have the data of that molecular drug. There's also a gap that we see in terms of their understanding of the application of cannabinoids for various therapies. So maybe I can ask Franjo, what are some of the gaps that you see in terms of our knowledge for treatment in patient use?
Well, let me say one word on the history of modern cannabis research, which started with clinical studies. The first was conducted in 1975. All clinical studies on the medical use of cannabis in different diseases has been initiated by patients. Patients went to their doctors at a university, and if they were lucky, this doctor found it very interesting, this experience, and he asked other patients if they had similar experiences. Let me give the example of Tourette syndrome. Studies on Tourette syndrome have been conducted at the Medical School of Hannover, because there we have a professor, Dr. Kirsten Müller-Warner, who was told by their patients in the 1990s, if we take cannabis, we have relief of our symptoms. Then he made the first study with 1 patient, the second study with 10 patients, 1-day studies, then a study with a few patients over a time of 4 weeks. This could have happened also to patients with other diseases. It is important that hospital doctors or doctors listen to their patients and don't say, this is not possible, we have no clinical data. We have to gain clinical data. My first patient with hyperhidrosis, who used cannabis and was successful, I met him 5 years ago. Before, I did not know that cannabis may work in hyperhidrosis. Then I wrote a very short piece in a hemp journal, German hemp journal, and I got feedback from other patients saying, I am also suffering from hyperhidrosis, I am profiting from it. So what we need is doctors at large hospitals, at universities, who listen to their patients, who tell them incredible stories about what cannabis can do. And and then to start research. Unfortunately, research is rather expensive. So if there is an interested doctor at a university, he will usually only be able to do an open study with 10 or 20 people, and he will not be able to carry out large studies. So what is necessary that companies and the scientists at university come together to look what can we do to profit the patient, the doctor, the industry.
Great. I guess as a follow-on, I'd like to ask the same thing of Tim. You know, we see that a lot of people in terms of prescribing for their pets, they really do think of them as extensions of the family. So, you know, we hear stories of people putting their dogs on Prozac or on cardiovascular heart drugs to extend their life, also dealing with pain. You know, we've seen applications for PTSD, depression, anxiety. What type of things are you seeing in terms of veterinary medicine and the approaches that you're taking using cannabinoid therapy?
Yeah, I think some of the things that are uniquely challenging when it comes to the medical aspect of cannabis is that it's very backwards. A lot of times when we're looking at other therapeutics, other drugs, you know, we tend to have these clinical trials that are established, and then what happens is the patients benefit afterwards. But cannabis coming from a black market, essentially what happens is now the market becomes the driving force, and the science and the medicine take a back seat and have to play catch up. Because the market will operate, whether it's a black, gray, or legal market, the market will always be there and it will continue to operate. Now, the reality is when the market is black or gray, the scientific and the medical aspect of it are going to be unable to operate. And so what we see is that we see in terms of the real world evidence, we see a lot of patients using it for all sorts of different things. We see a lot of case studies that have been successful for things like pain, anxiety, inflammation, whether it's allergies or autoimmune diseases, nausea, seizures, and cancer. But we're seeing a lack of complete clinical trials and clinical evidence because of the market that we have to operate in. That's really, really unfortunate. And veterinarians, especially in America, are in a unique position because across America, veterinarians are actually not allowed to discuss cannabis with their clients. So something that's potentially beneficial or even life-saving for their clients, they can't even discuss that. Now, California has changed a little bit because last year we helped get a bill passed called AB 2215 that allows for California veterinarians to discuss cannabis with their clients. So first bill of its kind in the country, and hopefully it leads the way for people to be able to discuss this with their veterinarians. Because if they're not hearing it from their veterinarians, their primary source of medical information, what happens is they're going to go on the internet, they're going to Google these symptoms and find out what it may or may not do. And a lot of times this information can be false or inaccurate. They're asking friends or family when they really should be talking to medical professionals about this. Unfortunately, when it comes to the endocannabinoid system and cannabinoid therapeutics in general, the medical teachings are far behind. So when I talk to a lot of veterinarians, they don't know about the endocannabinoid system. They don't know about endocannabinoids. And so you can just imagine if you went to your doctor, you went to your veterinarian, you asked them about the endocrine system. You ask them about what insulin does for your body. What happens if you have low levels of testosterone or estrogen, and they throw up their hands and say, I don't know. How would you feel as a patient? How would you feel if that's what your medical professional said? And that's the reality of what we're dealing with. A lot of times these veterinarians or physicians, they say, I don't know, because they're not being taught this material in school, and this information isn't being made available to them. Again, partially because of the legal blockades that are involved here. And so this is the problem that we're seeing is a lack of education, and this is one of the things that we're focused on is educating veterinarians and veterinary clients to be able to have this education so that they can make informed decisions about their health care.
That's really wonderful. One of the things that we're looking at is building custom solutions for custom disease states. So we're looking at isolating compounds so that we can deliver next generation proper pharmaceuticals. And this is something that Hinanit is doing in Israel. So maybe you can tell us about what you think are some of the biggest opportunities for development and exploration based on your view of cannabis.
I would like just first to say a few words about the issue of education and what I'm involved with in Israel in the frame of the Ministry of Health is teaching medical personnel, physicians, nurses, pharmacists about cannabis. And it's so interesting to see how stigmatized this subject is. Nevertheless, the stigma is being slowly being reduced. And I think, and I completely confer to what you said, but this is a matter of education, of really educating the personnel, the medical personnel on cannabis and on the different properties. So I definitely agree with this. So that's one. Taking the same line, answering your question. What I think the main importance here is to close the gap that we have today between the current knowledge of what we know about cannabis, on the different compounds, on the entourage effect, and the actual compounds that are working together or separately for different medical indications. I think that, from my experience at least, that many of the physicians, the doctors are having a real problem to recommend a patient to smoke a joint, okay, to get better. They do not see that as a treatment, as a medicine, and this is, I think it's not just in Israel, but
I think North America shares a similar view towards smoking, and as a non-medical form, most physicians that I talk to would prefer that people use an oil or use an edible or vaporize using a device, because obviously it's not good to combust and you get all the other bad chemicals in along with the good chemicals.
Exactly, and not just that, this is not a medicine.
Agreed.
So here, first of all, specifying what compounds are the active ones. This is so important, definitely for treatment and also for the physicians, for the medical personnel to accept cannabis as a medicine. That's one. And then two is the delivery, the method of delivery, which should be much improved, no doubt. From smoking to actual products that have certain formulation, high bioavailability, high absorbance, dosing. These should be dosed.
I agree. So one of the things that is needed when we're looking at this as a medicine is the concept of transparency. And standardization, because if you are going to take it from a dried flower and you're going to render it down into isolates that are reconstituted or formulated, you need to deliver an experience that is going to be the same every time, and that's what it's going to take for it to be well understood. But what we're seeing in studies from ones like in Israel that Dave Berg had done on cancer cells, where he looked at 600 cancer cells and subjected them to 600 different strains of cannabis to identify one that stopped the tumor growth. If we're going to have to do trial and error testing like that, it's unfortunately prohibitive and time constraining. So a lot of what we need to do to get our knowledge up to par is done through observational science, because like it or not, this is not a drug that's come into power through clinical trials. It's been brought in by government and constitutional rights around the world. So perhaps I can turn it back to Dr. Franjo to ask you about what your experience is in the German market and what changes that you've seen in your practice over the years that you've been involved in prescribing. As I understand, you look at a number of advanced cases.
we all were surprised that the number of patients are increasing so quickly in Germany. It is clear that usually 1 or 2% of the population in industrialized countries need cannabis as a medicine. We see that from Canada, Israel, and the Netherlands, that it will be 1 or 2%, also in US states. And I was aware that this will also come to Germany, so we expect to have 800,000 or 1.6 million patients in Germany in the future. Currently we have about 40,000 patients, and it is increasing very quickly. And doctors, politicians are just currently realizing that cannabis as a medicine is not an exception compared to standard medication, but that it is an important medical treatment, a good medicine. And the number of doctors are also increasing. We know it from other countries that first there are very few physicians who are ready to prescribe it. And that's what's happening in Germany. There are a few physicians, and the development is quicker than we thought, that physicians are ready to do it, even against the obstacles by the law. It's not so easy to prescribe cannabis in Germany. Physicians do it anywhere for their patients. And the number of patients are increasing quickly, and the number of doctors also. But of course, there is much uncertainty. What is described here as a chance that cannabis is so diverse, and we have different strains and batches, for a beginner, this is a confusion, and it makes it not easier but more difficult. That is the reason why many physicians in Germany start with dronabinol, only THC, or with standardized extracts. And what we have to do is to give them education so that they regard the different potencies, the different possibilities of cannabis treatment as a chance and not as a threat or as a confusing issue. I talked about indica sativa or CBD, THC. Patients want to find their strain, which works best, and they want to have it standardized, that they get all of the same strain. And physicians have to understand that cannabis is more than THC and regard this as a chance to find a better treatment for their doctors. We need education, we need standardization, and we need clinical research.
Thank you. So Tim, with standardization, research, what are you seeing in terms of veterinary science? Is there standardization? We're seeing pet foods, we're seeing hemp products. What type of products are being frequented by pet owners in California, and for what?
Yeah, so like I said before, primarily what we see is tinctures, oral-based medications. We definitely do not have pets smoking or vaporizing, so I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. We get that question all the time. Please don't have your pet smoke. That's not enjoyable.
Do not hotbox your dog.
Please don't. That's coming from a veterinarian. But yeah, we use it for pain, anxiety, inflammation, nausea, seizures, and cancer, like I said before. Now, the unique thing about cannabis is that it's an incredibly complex plant. There's over 500 pharmaceutical components of the plant. The endocannabinoid system is infinitely complex. The CB1 receptors, we used to think that they were only in the central nervous system. Now we know that they're found all throughout the body. Same thing with the CB2 receptors. And then even when we're looking at the cannabinoid receptors, in human studies, they've shown to have genetic polymorphism. What that means is that your CB1 receptors may not be encoded as the same as the person sitting next to you. So cannabis, the way it works on your body, may not be the way that it works on your neighbor's body. And so we think that that may be the case in animals also, because we do see variations in dosing protocols. So, we could have a 70-pound dog that uses it for epilepsy that uses a higher dose than another one that uses a much lower dose. One may need it 3 times a day, the other may be able to use it just 1 time a day. So that's some of the difficulties that we're encountering, is that it's hard to standardize dose for each individual patient when we know that there can be so much differentiation. CBD, the molecule, works on over 40 different molecular targets. It has very weak affinity for the CB1, CB2 receptors. And so this is something that it shows you just how complex it is, and we're trying to get a clearer picture of it, but it's going to take time. And in the meantime, the mantra of starting low and then gradually titrating up to the effective optimum therapeutic dose is good advice, not just for people, but also for animals.
So that's good advice in any time using cannabis. Start low, go slow. So one of the things that we've just been asked is to open up the floor to questions.
All right. Let's hear it again for the panel, first of all. That's fantastic.
Hi, my name is Thomas Garling. I have a question to Franjo. So when you claim this, or when you say, well, okay, there must be more doctors to support this and need to be educated, when I saw a video or a report on German TV where the Ärztekammer, the CEO of the Ärztekammer has been strongly kind of very controversial and against supporting cannabis. Maybe you can tell me how's the strategy to really break out of the wall, because this is a lot of effort without with maybe just a little effect today, with a lot of effort on your side. That's one question.
Okay. What we see today is that every doctor is somehow finding his own way to treat their patients. For example, a colleague in the board of directors of the ISM and the ICM is also a German doctor at the university, and we recently talked together and found out that we have the same idea of the usefulness of cannabis as a medicine, but we have different approaches. And this was the reason why we decided to have a panel of doctors at our next ISM conference, which will also be in Berlin, where doctors tell the audience what is their approach. We need education, this is one thing, but we also have to realize that it is possible to get different approaches. Physicians are used to give single molecules, for example, THC, and or a standardized extract, such as sativix. It is, for example, from the Ärztekammer, they are more supporting these efforts, and sometimes are saying that cannabis flowers is a kind of middle-age medicine. And so the flowers may be regarded as a threat to usual therapy, and we have to change it that it is a chance to a better treatment. Yeah? If someone is asking me, a doctor in Germany, how can I start the treatment? Then I usually say, you may start with THC or standardized extract. And if you have more experience, then you can change to a cannabis flower, perhaps to get more effects than with THC, perhaps lesser side effects or better effects. So we need education, but every doctor also have to make his career, his experience, his own education with the interaction of his patients. And this makes cannabis somewhat special, because other medicines, you bring it to the market, and you say you start with 5 milligrams, then go to 10 milligrams. It's always the same way. With cannabis, it's not always the same way. I am sure that I have different ways than many other doctors. And that's what we try to bring to doctors that there is no one golden way to treat patients with cannabis-based medicines.
Thank you. One quick one.
We have time for one more.
One very quick though.
Sure.
Yes.
Hey, I'm Craig from the UK Cannabis Social Club, so that leads me perfectly into my question actually. But we do have a one-size-fits-all medical cannabis product available in the UK called Sativex. It's labelled as having X amount of THC and X amount of CBD in it, but we all know that it's a full plant extract. It's got all the flavonoids and terpenes in there as well, and and esters. So isn't it a little bit insincere that we're labelling up or talking about creating these medicines with just THC and CBD in it when they do have all these other drug interactions? Because if I take two strains similar to GW have for Sativex and say, well, this one produces an almost pure THC extract, this one produces an almost pure CBD extract, I'm going to mix them together to get the ratio I need, and then I'm going to give it to people. I could, if Ngaio takes two strains he's got over in San Francisco, only two, got to keep it easy on this one. If you take two strains you've got over there that make that high THC and high CBD, you're still going to get a different reaction from the strains that I'm going to make that, from the home. Yet when we're talking to government ministers and politicians and journalists, they're very confused by this because they're like, well, no, what the pharmaceutical company is, this is just THC and CBD. So it leaves people like me, activists, patients. I've been denied a prescription in the UK now. I've got Crohn's disease. And it leaves us in a really bad situation because people want to follow the science and who seems to be the most educated on this when we've got a lot more experience in it. I've got 6 strains I know work for my condition, for different symptoms that I need to function on a daily basis. So I can't be turned around and told, no, you can't grow your own, you're going to have one of these available from one of these companies and you're going to suck it up and deal with it. But that's not really working for us. So we're pushing for the right to grow at home. I just want to know, where do you think that actually fits in this sort of interim period before we've actually got any of these products we're all talking about one day making? For people like me, should we decriminalise for people to be able to grow in Europe as well?
I think you touch here a very important point of the somewhat superficial view that most have on cannabis, and I'm including pharmaceutical companies, talking only on THC and CBD in an extract is superficial view. You have so many other compounds, molecules in these extracts, and they're so important and may change so much the outcome. I just want to share with you briefly just one of the observations that we had in our studies. We work on IBD, inflammatory bowel diseases, and we examine in our systems, in collaboration with Mayo Hospital in Israel, we examine the effect of cannabis extracts, fractions, and compounds on alleviation of colon inflammation. We see that you can imagine the extract like a pile of Lego building blocks. We see that when we choose some of the building blocks and put them together, we can get efficacy which is 20 times higher. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Just by taking the right building blocks, okay? So this is just one example to the point that you touched, that we need to know so much more on cannabis and need to know to choose better the compounds, let them work together to get much better effect, and you can, I think that you can imagine that different diseases should be treated very much specifically by different combinations.
I hate to cut you off, but we're completely out of time, but you're correct. Let's hear it again for the panel.